Welcome back. We're visiting with Erica Palmer-Smith, who is the Executive Director of NC Child. And Erica, thank you for hanging with us. And I mean, it's been a while since I've had somebody in child care or in some of the early childhood programs, but I think this kind of snuck up on a lot of us who haven't been paying attention. You talk about the cliff in child care funding, and we know it ended under 30th, and you've got an extension. So I think we've got everybody up to speed on what we were talking about in the first segment. But now, if you wouldn't mind, let's talk about some of the solutions and how are we going to fund this and where the money's going to come from and some of the ideas you might have. And let's start with the state. I know folks have been pressuring the state to come up with some funds, and obviously you got the extension, so that's great. But after that, what happens? What are you hearing?
Absolutely. Well, there are a number of robust policy solutions that we can look at beyond extension of the child care cliff. We talked a bit about the statewide subsidy floor being one of those. Additional investments into child care workforce recruitment, additional investments into NC Pre-K and into Smart Start and into the Tri-Share program. Those are investments that are going to allow us to have a better child care industry and more sustainable child care industry for the long term. There are also a number of other policy solutions that we've seen play out in other states that have worked really well. One great example is that we know if we were to ensure that child care workers had access to those subsidies, if we were able to make sure that child care workers could have child care access for their own children, because so many of them are parents themselves, that we could see major improvements in our workforce retention. And again, these folks are making $14 an hour on average, and the cost of childcare for their own children exceeds oftentimes what it is that they're earning in wages. And so by mitigating those costs, we can have a more robust early childhood workforce. And with that, we have greater capacity and better access for families all across the state.
Well, that all makes sense. Where does the money come from, though? That's the big question. Who pays for this?
Absolutely. And so I think what we have to look at is how much money we're losing by not investing in this. And there's a couple things I'll mention. One of them is that there's multiple studies that have shown the impact of early investment in early childhood education. We know, for that matter, that for every dollar that we see invested in early childhood education programs, we see a $12 return on that investment, which is far higher than we see on the return for state investment into higher education programs and workforce training. The earlier we invest in our youth, the better return that we see. But more pertinent today is that the study that we just completed with the U.S. Chamber Foundation and the North Carolina Chamber Foundation saw an over $5.5 billion loss in economic return here in North Carolina because of childcare issues. Now, over $1 billion of that is lost tax revenue. So if we're better able to invest in our child care system to ensure that families can go to work and that children can get what they need, we're going to see better long-term economic outcomes for the state as a whole.
So we have the state and the government, which is basically the person. It's the taxpayer money. What about employers? They benefit a great deal from this. Have they thought about, and maybe not the small employers, but the big employers, throwing in and doing something about this?
I'm so glad you asked that question. We have had some of the best partnerships with our business leaders and business communities across the state. In addition to the State Chamber and the State Chamber Foundation, we have been working with local chambers of commerce and other business communities around the state, and we've watched them try to come up with innovative solutions locally that can help. We saw the Catawba Chamber of Commerce invest with the local Smart Start to ensure that teachers were able to get their background checks to go into early childhood classrooms. We've seen 3 of our communities work to partner as a part of these Tri-Share pilot programs that are where we're going to see the employers put in a third, the state put in a third, and then families and workers themselves put in a third to cover the cost of childcare in these communities. Our business community is so highly invested because it's impacting their workforce. And it's not just impacting the workforce of today, it's also impacting the workforce of tomorrow. Our business leaders know what the impacts of high quality early childhood education are, and they know that when our kids get those early learning opportunities, we know that they have higher reading proficiency scores. They're more likely to be able to read at grade level. They're more likely to graduate from high school. they're more likely to go off to college. And in fact, research has shown that they're more likely to have higher lifetime earnings. So our business community knows this is about the workforce of today and about the workforce of tomorrow, and they have been partnering with us heavily to make sure that we can find long-term sustainable solutions.
Well, if you were the ruler of planet Earth, what would NC Child come up with specifically that you would like to see happen if you could wave that magic wand?
You know, I wish that I could answer that more succinctly because this is such a complex issue. And right now, we're having to focus so heavily on keeping the system stable by focusing on these stabilization grant funds and extensions of these stabilization grant funds. But what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have a statewide subsidy floor, that we have a new market rate structure that makes more sense for what we're seeing in North Carolina. We need to make sure that our child care workers have access to child care for themselves so we can keep that workforce. We need to make sure that we're investing in those early learning programs like NC Pre-K, like Smart Start. We need to invest more heavily in programs like TriShare so that we can do more than this 3-county pilot, but really look at having that expand further across the state. There's so much that we can do to have a more robust, comprehensive system that can work for every family in North Carolina. And we look forward to working with our General Assembly when they come back to do just that.
All right. Well, for folks who have been watching this morning, and many I'm sure have children, how can they get in touch with you or NC Child and maybe become involved?
Absolutely. I would encourage them to visit ncchild.org. They can learn more about our work and they can sign up to get involved. It is more important now than ever that we have families and communities talking about this issue, sharing information about this issue. If we get more folks involved and learning about what's really happening, then we can work together better to solve this problem.
Well, I know they're talking about it around the kitchen table. I hear it too with folks who are impacted by childcare and the cost of it. And Erica, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for taking time for us.
Thank you so much for having me, Bill.
We'll be right back.